outdoors. And I'm super excited to be working with AWF and doing this collaboration with you. Just because, like I said, you're one of the very few people that have actually seen Outback. And so I could describe to you like, okay, I've got this garden over here, got a garden over there. I definitely want to add tires now. So there's just different things that I definitely want to add to the outdoors. And maybe I won't have an Outbacker come in thinking, what am I supposed to do? You know, there's just still things that I'm learning as a nature-based educator myself. But you know, you had said something really interesting when you came to Outback. You said, you're like, this is not just nature-based, this is nature preschool. Can you elaborate what's the difference between those two things?
Cool. Yeah.
Let me just say one thing. Part of the point of doing the interviews, because I want people to understand what is this stuff, you know? And so there's a lot of things that it took me a while to understand the terms. And even though I was doing it, I just didn't know there was a word for it. So if you can explain the difference between nature-based, actually there's nature-based in place, and then there's nature preschool. Like there's so many layers. That would be great.
Yeah. There's a lot of nuances too, and not only in the environmental education field and different types of environmental education, but also again, just in early childhood and nature programs. So a lot of people will use the terms interchangeably. So I'm gonna give everybody leeway. Like if you don't know the terms, you just start talking about it, because for those of us who are in it and study it a lot, we can go, and there's this philosophy and that philosophy and that philosophy, or that's this program, but this one's a little bit more on, so don't worry about all that. But what I will say is that the big difference is how much time is spent outside. So, and almost every, and I would assume every, I don't do the licensing part of early childhood, but every child care facility and early child care facility has that time that they need to go outside. That's part of it. And I don't know if it's a licensing regulation or just like, well, duh, kids go outside,
Right.
You have a playground. So there's that. And that right there, you're getting, because you stepped outside of a built environment into the air outside. That's nature right there, and you can build up from there. I guess one way to kind of think of it is, like I said, how much time you spend outside. So one way you can think of it is kind of a spectrum where there's indoor, and the whole program is set. I mean, I guess there'd be a program that's totally set inside, that you never step outside the door. The other one, on the other extreme of that, is that there's no building at all. It's just outside. Peeing happens outside, skinning the knee, clothing changes, everything, happens outside. So I would consider that a forest preschool, whether you're in the forest or whether you're in the tundra or whether you're in the desert, doesn't matter. So scaling it back a little bit from there is kind of what you've gotten, and that's what I would call a nature-based preschool. And there's many of them around the country, but not enough. Is there's the building, but most of the time is spent outdoors. All the focus is on nature. So even using that indoor space, say to put down your cubby or put down your stuff into your cubby, and the kids getting all together and saying that they're here, and then they go outside. But there's still a building that houses the extra clothes, that houses the bathroom, that houses the snack. And that's, again, there's a lot of them here in the United States. There's not enough of them, for sure. There needs to be a lot more. But that's, and I know for a lot of teachers that's even beyond their comfort zone. But there's amazing, amazing programs going on that are doing wonderful work, that I would consider them not just nature-based. I would consider them nature preschools. So the Dodge Center is one that comes to mind. So it's not as, for a lot of teachers, the idea of not having a building at all is a little bit out there for them, because beyond their comfort zone. And hopefully we'll get more of those forest schools around the country. We have a mutual friend, that does, Sally Ann, that does forest preschool, and amazing work being done with that. But those are also learning institutions. So you've got, at your center, you want them to learn, but you want them to do it through nature, through play. You're understanding that they learn through play, but you're also looking at, here's where they started. Here's what kind of things that they've learned, whether it's internal or, about themselves, or social, interacting with other kids. And of course, they're growing up all the time, so they're sponges, or whether it's like science learning. You can hit all kinds of different stuff with this. And then there's the idea of strictly play also. Play for its own sake. That the play is the focus and the important part. And the learning is like, oh, I'm sure they learned something. Right. But here's their playing. And so that's even a different philosophy, kind of an offshoot from that. And being part of the Adventure Playground movement, when I've gone to the Adventure Playground conferences, it's really interesting because there's so many of us from the nature play side. And that we go, oh, but you've built this thing. It looks like a playground. So that's adventure play, but it's not quite nature play. And so there's all these little nuances again. And I am a firm believer that we need every answer. Yes, is my answer to it. Because you need teacher, if a teacher can be a fantastic teacher, but she's not comfortable doing, or she or he not comfortable doing this thing. That's cool. That's fine. You're raising good people to become good people who are going to raise good people. That's the main focus of it, really, whether it's inside, whether it's nature-based, whether it's nature preschool, whether it's forest school, whether it's adventure play, whether it's nature play. If we're doing this out of the goodness of our hearts and we're doing a good job and we're striving to be better than that's the whole point, right? That's the end. The means maybe can be a little bit different, but we need all those answers. So as I've been learning about environmental education, I've been learning about all these little pieces and parts and going, oh, this is amazing stuff. I mean, what's, education for a sustainable planet is another philosophy of how we teach. Even just in the nature play world, there are several major movers and shakers: Rusty Keeler, Robin Moore, who I mentioned, Nature Explorer, Eric Nelson. They have different philosophies, but the end is always the same. It's how can we get kids connected with nature? So they grow up taking care of it. And but the philosophies or the intentionality or the design is going to look a little bit different. Hey, that's whatever, all of those answers are yes answers.
Wow. See, I have to take notes from all of this and make sure people can find this information. So my other question is, if a parent, after hearing all this amazing stuff that AWF has to offer, how can a parent connect? Or is this an option for parents? Or how can an educator connect with you?
That's a really good question, Dee. And that's what I'll be developing. And I'm really excited about developing that. My mandate is to reach kids directly. But as you know, my specialty and where I get my jazz hands is connecting with those adults. So, so what I'm, so we're going to, next weekend, we're going to meet up. I'm going to meet your family again. And I'm so excited, one, about fishing with your husband. I'm bringing my fishing pole. The other one is I'm really excited about hanging out with your daughter too, because she's so sweet. She's full of life. She's excited about everything. She still has that child part of herself, but there's still this like wants to be jaded part of her, and it's awesome. I love it. And so I'm really looking forward to hanging out with her.
In present day, you haven't seen her, because now when I got up today, somebody was working on their Girl Scout GeoSmart patch.
Awesome.
That's what she was doing. Cool. So like her experience, how she was outdoors 6+ months ago versus now, it's game changer. I can't believe it. I'm like, I think I have a nature child.
Yeah. Well, if she has a Girl Scout badge where she needs to talk to somebody that's a career, the career in nature or something, who knows? But
Exactly.
anyway, her and I'll connect on that stuff. And I love connecting. I have several friends with kids. I don't have enough friends with young kids, and I really need to reconnect with all that. Because my kids are in their 20s now, and they don't have grandkids for me yet. I'm too young for that yet. So I'm hoping they'll hold off for a little bit. So yeah, I don't have at this point. I don't have much of a way to do that yet, and I want to. I'm kind of in the listening stages. What is it that parents want or need? I'm a real advocate for doing this in the backyard. You can bird in your backyard. You can garden in your backyard. So, and kids play in the backyard all the time. And there's little things that we can do in our backyards to make them even more interesting. So one of the things I did do was Sally Ann and I did a Nature Niños program. So our mutual friend Sally Ann is with the New Mexico Wildlife Federation, also the state affiliate of National Wildlife Federation. They're in New Mexico. They have a wonderful program called Nature Niños. And Sally does a weekly program with them. And she had me come in and do a presentation. Actually, it turned into two because the parents loved it so much, where we talked about how to change those backyards into something a little, that incorporates a little bit more nature play. And, and the parents were coming in going, oh, there's just nothing in my backyard. I'm like, look at this palette. It's perfect. And I think you said the same thing. I've got nothing back here. I'm going, you've got space and you've got determination and drive and you've got an interest. It's like all you need, look, there's your spigot. Perfect. We're ready.
Right.
And we can transform it from there. And hopefully those parents have had a great time with that. But that's available for people, and I can figure out how to get you the link to that so that people can watch those videos, because you'll get ideas from that. So I'm hoping to continue that with Arizona Wildlife Federation. I'm not quite sure, again, what the best methods for that are. So I'm very interested in hearing from people what we need. The ECHO program does have a best practices video that people can watch. We have on the, like I said, National Wildlife Federation just has so many wonderful programs, and their website is awesome. So they've got their Gardening for Wildlife program is kind of the umbrella for a lot of things, and it puts its roots into a lot of different stuff. So you can learn how to create backyard habitat better for wildlife. So if you're just an individual or just a parent, you can do that. If you're a business, you can do that. You can also participate in that program if you're a place of worship. There's the Sacred Grounds program that not only encourages people in their, at the church grounds, but also their congregation to create these backyard habitats as stewards for the earth, of making sure that we are mitigating climate change. That's a big one for Sacred Grounds program. Really amazing work coming out of Michigan for that program. And then there's also the Eco Schools program, which has been traditionally done at a school. And so that's another program that we're going to get started here in Arizona. And we're reaching out to some different schools to ask if they'd be interested in participating in the program. And of course, schools are just kind of all over the board. There's so many things for them to think about this year. So I know it's another like, oh gosh, can I add this to my plate or not? But a lot of those teachers have already been involved in the Eco School program and wanting to figure out, well, how can I make it stronger? So AWF is going to start taking a bigger space in that to help teachers like, okay, you've done this before, you're really committed to your gardening, but maybe kids are half time or hybrid, what can we make happen? And NWF took the Eco Schools program and they really expanded it out. You don't even have to have a program at your school to be able to do Eco Schools anymore. You can come in as a parent. And that was a huge, huge, amazing shift that they did, and really opens a lot of doors for people. So that's at nwfecoschools.org. And oh my goodness. And then there's also, community-based too. I'm hoping to make some more collaborations in the state. I've already got one hopefully in the works where we're going to try to make, there's 3 communities in Arizona, and Ajo is one of them, that have become community certified wildlife habitats. So that means you've got to have about 40 or 50 people backyards who have created wildlife habitat gardens. But then you also have to educate so that people will create these spaces more, and at businesses, not just people's backyards, but you know, nature programs, or either nature-based preschools or nature programs, after school programs. They're you know, they are no-brainers for helping to create a schoolyard habitat, which is part of that Gardening for Wildlife and Eco Schools program, kind of a juncture there. But also to make your community more wildlife friendly. And, you know, and some people who are going to listen are going to go, oh, wildlife, that means deer, you know, coming into my garden. Right. And scale it down a little bit. For some people in the country, yes, it means deer in the garden. I've moved to Payson, Arizona, and I actually have elk poop on my yard, and I'm so excited about that. But I planted mint and I planted strawberries, and I thought, oh, the next day they're going to be gone. Well, it's been a week already, and they haven't eaten them yet, so I'm hopeful. But you know, I want both of them there. I want the mint and I want the elk. I want the whole, you know. I'm doing it for both. But for most of us, wildlife in our backyard, especially where I lived in Phoenix for the past almost 10 years, you've got a block wall and you've got your garden. And what comes in are those lizards and those butterflies and the hummingbirds and the doves. And they are no less charismatic, and they're wonderful to watch. They're wonderful to know that you're helping that animal find a place for it to have a little bit of cover so it can raise its young, for it to be able to get a drink of water, especially when, you know, or to have a habitat. We are, you know, the habitat loss is the biggest thing that's happening on our planet right now. We are taking up a lot of space, especially, you know, especially us Americans. And whatever, you know, if we can create a tiny little patch, even if we're growing corn or we're growing pumpkins, or we have preferably even native plants, you know, somewhere on your yard, you know, you think of a little butterfly, and, you know, a monarch butterfly is this, it's like 2.5 inches long. I mean, if we think about how far it is for us to walk a mile, okay, maybe 15 minutes, you know, or whatever. That butterfly, it needs to go from backyard to backyard. Even, you know, a lizard or a beetle, their home territories are even smaller. So there's not a lot of choices for them. If they get kicked out of one house, where the heck are they going to go? And I think that's, you know, that's something that early learners can understand, that is that their home and their family is so important to them. And it's even a little scary for kids to think about an animal not having a place to live, or you know, them not having a place to live. So sometimes we don't even bring that up because it's a little, you know, it's almost too big for them. But that's, you know, you leave any child, you know, building materials, and that's the first thing they start to make is a little home. And so it's a very natural thing to encourage, you know, let's build a home for this butterfly by putting out this flower, you know, and putting out planting this tree. I mean, it's, like I said, it's kind of no-brainer stuff. But maybe it's becoming that way. Maybe, you know, because it's not everywhere, maybe it's not no-brainer stuff, and we need to, you know, be making sure we're bringing it back.
I think it's really interesting in you explaining just in the backyard, like how much you can really impact wildlife. And the home that I live in, we discovered this year that we have a mulberry tree. Thanks to Nikki helping me identify what is this tree. But our yard, our front and backyard, has always been, and you know, I'm so like irrationally terrified of birds, but it is like birder paradise, seriously. Between the hummingbirds, we get the brown doves, we get the migration that comes through in our county. They come through right through our yard. We have the Mexican
Southern Arizona
plants in the front. So we get all kinds of butterflies in the very front. And even though the plant drives my better half crazy, because like once a seed pod like pops, then a new plant comes up in the spring. But we get so many like wildlife. And then we have lizards that hang out in the backyard. And then of course, adding the 3 chickens, it's just like, it's this weird space. Like everything's just kind of evolving, so I think that's really interesting,
Yeah,
that how as a parent and even as an educator, somehow I'm still contributing and didn't know it. It
absolutely.
took,
Absolutely.
in the last few years to realize that I am actually contributing, and having to be mindful not to cut certain things back, and making sure that we do cut certain plants at the right time so they'll come back the following year. It's really interesting.
It
So,
is, and it's definitely a rabbit hole with that, but I think it keeps a lot of people from gardening. And
right,
so, my approach to you was like, try it.
right,
Gardeners kill a lot of plants because they plant a lot of plants, and
right.
death is just part of that natural cycle. And
Yeah,
and I think a lot of people come into gardening going, "Oh, I'm too scared; it's going to die." Yeah, probably will.
right.
Oh
Exactly.
well. But it also might live. A little bit of air, a little bit of sunshine, a little bit of water, and and
Just
and
never
plants
know.
give you a lot of warning. And you can try all kinds of fun things, and I'm a real proponent of that. Is just like, if you've got this amazing little garden space back there, and you could plant just wheat one season, and oh, it's beautiful. Wheat is just the most beautiful plant growing. You could plant just corn. You could plant pumpkins. And because you're in southern Arizona, you've got 4 seasons that you can plant,
Right,
and you don't have to listen to like your pumpkins will be growing in like you'll in February, March, you'll have pumpkins instead of
right,
October. I mean, that's just how, Arizona's kind of backwards from all that. But if we think that we don't have the space, or we think we don't have the skills, we do, and we can develop those skills. And I know I've empowered you, which is just wonderful to me. And hopefully we're empowering beyond that, not just that child, but that child that comes home and goes, I want this plant, or I want this butterfly, or the parent that comes and picks up their child from your preschool and is like, what are they playing with? What is that? Oh, I
right.
didn't know that was okay for them to touch. You're like, yes, you
I
know.
have a story for that.
Mhm.
So I have an outbacker that relocated to Alaska,
Mm.
in the midst of when COVID really hit and everything. And I want to say it was 2 weeks ago, the outbacker's parent sent me a picture of the outbacker standing next to their giant sunflower that I gave them seeds to.
Yes.
And it just like warmed my
My
heart.
sunflower plant that I
I'm
gave
like,
you, you
oh
gave
my
them.
God,
That's awesome. You grew it.
yes.
Awesome.
So an outbacker actually grew it. I just couldn't, in Alaska. I
Yeah.
had no idea. But it was just
Wonderful.
like, it warmed my heart just to know that even though with everything going on, somehow this outbacker is still impacted by the
Absolutely.
time that we
Absolutely.
had
Mhm.
together. And that just, I don't know, it just kind of like brought tears to me
Oh
just
yeah.
in looking at the picture.
And they're going to keep that forever. That's the thing about early childhood, is that it's such an imprinting stage, that's why I feel it's almost more important than advocating at this adult level, because once you get them hooked when they're little, they're there for life. um,
Exactly.
and if we think about civilizations that moved with the seasons to be able to take advantage of where game was, or where plants were, and we can hunt and gather. And even beyond that, when we started to put down, even when we started to put down agriculture, we moved to a lot of civilizations moved to another spot and had another farm somewhere. Well, this season's done. We're going to go to this farm in the other season.
Right.
And children grew up in that. Your brain is wired for the first 3 years because you've traveled your migration route a few times.
Right.
And if you think animals do it, that's what our brain was programmed for. And we don't
Exactly.
have that now. And our brain is still going, wait a minute, whoa. Um,
Exactly.
so, it's that, everything I needed to learn, I learned in kindergarten. Actually, you've learned it a couple years before kindergarten
Mhm.
started. And so when we get these little kiddos, and we think that they're just sitting out in nature watching this butterfly go by, or tearing a flower apart, they and that I think that's why destruction is so important also. A small child gets to know how things are put together by tearing them apart. And that, I'm in no way an advocate for like blowing up the Grand Canyon. You know, I mean, that's different. But we've got to rearrange streams and move rocks and realize what lives underneath them. And yeah, you know, you're going to see caddisflies living underneath the rocks. And when you set that rock down somewhere else, you've essentially eradicated the 4 caddisflies underneath that rock because you've shifted their home 6 inches and that's their world.
Right.
But if we just tell them not to do that, they'll never understand the value in it. So there has to be that little bit of destruction. And it's way easier. The scale of what early childhood destroys as compared to us as adults,
right?
There's a huge gap. And if we can help, you know, little kids can destroy something so that they're daylighting a stream when they're an adult, you know, or recycling when they're an adult, and voting for conservation when they're an adult, that is worth it. And I'm sure there are people that disagree with me on that, but after seeing, you know, the impact that small children have, their footprint is so small, and our footprint as adults is just huge. But our impact on children connecting to the earth, that has immense power. And we used to have that power, you know, and when we lost it somewhere, we need to get it back by every means necessary.
I agree. So, closing remarks. Mm-hmm. I'm going to ask kind of maybe a one-part question. What would you like to say to, I would say, a college student or just an adult in general? I know just from paying attention to what's going on in the world, there are a lot of young adults unsure about what to do. How do I get into this work? And because you've been doing this work for years, what would you suggest? What would you give as a recommendation to dive into environmental ed?
Oh, that's a great question. I'm actually connecting with a high schooler right now who's just starting on that journey of interpretation and environmental education, and I'm so happy to be a part of this young man's life right now. It's again finding what makes you tick in nature and going from there. And in a few years it might be different. You know, I had no idea that I was going to become an adult onset hunter later on in my life. I had no idea when I was, you know, identifying plants. I was a million miles away from gardening at that time, you know.
Right.
So we evolve and we change, and our connection with nature changes, and it flourishes really. And what you take from this, you know, it influences something else that you're doing later on.
Right.
When we can study the natural world, and get our hands on it somehow. I use the term the trained eye a lot. Right. Everybody on the planet has the trained eye for something. You know, if you collect model cars, you know a lot more about model cars. You know, my parents used to drive around in an RV. I'd go to visit them. I did not have the trained eye for the RVs. They all looked exactly the same to me. Right. My kid could pick them out. But if you hand me a plant, I can figure out what family it's in almost immediately. So I've got this trained eye for plants. Other people have the trained eye for birds. Other people have the trained eye for, I can't distinguish still a coos deer from a mule deer. I'm still working on that. And it's, you know, comes down to the tail, you know. So people have the trained eye for things. And if you can get the trained eye in nature on anything, whether it's, I was, at one of our programs, there was a professional bass fisherman.
Okay.
I don't know how you make a living being a fisherman. I think that's amazing. But he said, look out over the water and you see where there's kind of this weird little ripple. And he was describing the surface texture of the water. And I'm like, he knew that there were bass there and there were bass there and there were bass there because of the ripples on the water.
Oh, wow.
And so I'm like, I'm a nature girl, but I don't know that. That's amazing. Right. You know, so everybody, when they go out in nature, they're going to find something about it that they love about it. You know, a mountain biker is going to go, that trail is going to give me this awesome air that's going to give me, going up is going to give me a really good workout. They can look at that and they can see it. A kayaker is going to be able to read the water. Hunter is going to be able to read the signs of where their animal passed through, or if it's not the season of the animal that they're hunting, they'll go, okay, I'm going to come back here in a few months because then it's going to be deer season. And I knew this was a deer here, just by the nibbles on a branch. And children can learn that too. There's a fantastic book called Crinkle Root series, and he talks about 50 plants every child should know, and 50 birds, or maybe it's even 10. They're children's books, are wonderfully drawn. They're all based on the East Coast though, so we need a Crinkle Root for the West Coast for sure.
Right.
But for anybody who's starting out in this field, whatever they're excited about, share that. And you don't have to call it teaching. You can call it teaching if you want, but it's sharing, because when we're teaching, we often have these like, oh, we've got to reach this goal, and and I'm all for evaluation. I do a lot of it. But let's start with just sharing. And the goal is inspiring somebody else to have the joy about what you're sharing with them. And, if we share how much we're enjoying it, that they're going to, get wrapped up in that. And then, you start on this journey, and a few years later, maybe it changes into something else. I've had the pleasure of helping several adults, start getting into the field of environmental ed and interpretation, and not quite knowing where they wanted to be with it, or not quite knowing if it was the place for them. And right. And some of them still are not in the field, because that's not the important part. It was, I want to be able to take a hike with somebody I know, or at least I want to be able to take a hike and see the right. stuff around me. Yeah, you're looking, but are you really seeing that stuff? Right. And just doing that, that's a fantastic start. As for careers, environmental education doesn't pay very much at all. And often when we start, we have to start from the very bottom of the heap. I was in my late 30s when I got this job at Desert Botanical Garden, and I had years of science-based plant information behind me, but I still started at $11 an hour. Right. And I still started part-time. And I'm not there anymore. I quickly moved on from that. But that's kind of the sad part, is that for all of education, it's really not, for the immense amount of value that educators give our children. We are so underpaid. It's unbelievable. Because we are shaping the generations to come. We really are. Right. And so that's something to think about with environmental education, is that you got to start off, understanding that you're doing it because you love doing it. And however you can make that happen, whether it's volunteering, or going to participating in a summer institute, or having your neighbor over to teach them a little bit about gardening. There are so many places to volunteer with when it comes to any type of environmental anything. There's just tons of, whether it's outdoor recreation or wildlife or plants. So just there's so much opportunity. And once you start doing that, that gives you, and that experience accounts for a lot when agencies are hiring. Even if it's volunteer experience, it counts for a lot. So, work that angle for sure. And then whatever jobs come your way, whether they're seasonal, whether it's long-term, whether it's part-time, and those they can build upon each other. So if somebody's just starting to get into this career, find what you like about it. If wildlife's your thing, follow that track. And then something's going to happen within a few years, and you'll be like, oh my God, but it's how wildlife connects with blah, and I got to do that. Okay, well then you go on that path. And because you've already been in that field, that comes with you to the next location, and especially with environmental education, because so many of us are science communicators, we can talk about whatever, someday I'll get stars, and I just don't yet, but I will someday. But if somebody comes in and says, I want you to give an environmental education program, I'm going to fly you to New Hampshire. I'm like, I don't know that ecosystem, but I can talk. I can do an environmental education program for 4 hours the next day.
Right, right.
So, you know, and it's, we can all you know, get to that stage, because we're gonna have whatever it is we're excited about, whether it's birds or clouds or flowers or
Right.
how it all fits together, you know, any of it.
Well, thank you so much, Nikki, for coming on today. It was such a pleasure talking with you and listening and just hearing your journey as an environmental educator, and then also talking to us about Arizona Wildlife Federation. And I can't wait to continue our collaboration with Outback Learning with AAEE, which is Arizona Association Environmental Ed, and our Early Childhood Education Working Group. That's a mouthful. But most importantly, I really value our friendship and just the times that we've had opportunities to just connect and talk. And so I'm very thankful that you showed up today and just was willing to share your story and willing to share the work that you do present day.
Thank you. Thank you for letting me talk your ear off, Dee, and thank you all who are listening for being interested in this topic. That's where it starts.
Awesome. Thank you so much.